do so well at, but they don't kill us. But I guess people who are vulnerable would be people like this. Maybe if they have cystic fibrosis, they might have some underlying kind of medical condition. As I say, they've maybe been on, they've had surgery, maybe chemotherapy. So things like that. Those are the ones who are most vulnerable, more so than just sort of normal people. Okay, and just to conclude, we aren't winning this war in terms of developing new defences at the moment. No, we're around the world is not kind of investing enough, I guess, in this whole process. And I guess the problem is that we haven't been investing enough for a long time, and so because it takes us 10 to 15 years to get a drug from the lab into humans, we're kind of trying to play catch up. We're basically 10 years behind where we should be. All right, it's a glum prospect. Thank you for joining us and illuminating us a bit there. So the march of the fungi.
Yeah, Jim, I've just got a message from my husband. He says, don't listen to the compost deniers. Composting is still good. It takes waste away from landfill. So there's my plug.
It's fine now that he's healthy.
That's right, yeah.
Just briefly, here's a little snatch of Sheku Kane Mason, the 19-year-old cellist who'll play at the royal wedding tomorrow. He's best known for his version of No Woman, No Cry, which probably won't be on his repertoire tomorrow. So he sounds as if he'll be well worth listening to. Yeah. Where will you both be, please?
I will be at the Lower North Island Regional National Party Conference.
When is it, Jim? When is it again?
It's very good, Duncan.
Point taken.
Look, I will actually be at the Northern South Island Regional Labour Party Conference.
Oh, you're both there. You're both got conferences.
We'll both be surrounded by our supporters and members in a very happy place.
Yeah, so I'll be in Blenheim. So I won't tarry for Harry. Not a moment. It just really doesn't interest me, that whole pomp and ceremony thing. It doesn't. And look, it's a lovely moment for them, and that's really important. But it is strange, this fever that grips the large parts of the Commonwealth.
Well, you said earlier it's because it's abetted by everybody sending their anchors or correspondents into London and hoping for ratings and clicks. Do you think, Nicola? Do you think that people see a joyous new beginning in this union, or?
I think everyone loves a wedding. Everyone always loves a wedding. It's the happiest celebration there can be. Two people in love saying, let's spend the rest of our lives together. There's something incredibly hopeful about marriage. And whenever people are getting married, I think we all feel a sense of celebration, royal or unroyal.
Here's a bargain, panellists. Windsor Court Hotel in New Orleans has a package priced at $51,000. You don't go to London, you get 3 nights in New Orleans. You get an airfare there. You get cardboard cutouts of Harry and Meghan, afternoon tea, and a lemon elderflower cake, just like the one chosen by the happy couple.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Sounds lovely.
If you had a spare 51,000, you'd be spending it on that, I know you would.
I can think of better places to go. Azerbaijan's looking good right now.
Hey, I hope you both have great conferences at the weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good fun.
Hey, great. Thanks, Nicholas. Good to talk to you,
Have a good weekend.
And for being the first 2 sitting MPs to ever appear on the panel together, Nationals' Nicola Willis and Labour's Duncan Webb. So our gratitude to them and our gratitude to you for listening to us this week, and have a lovely weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Tō te maira hoa mā he kōreru kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, a repeat rapist gets sent to jail, possibly for the rest of his life. We consider the budget through the eyes of Maori and people in education and housing, some of whom appear to have had much higher hopes for it. We go live to Windsor on the eve of Prince Harry's wedding to Meghan. They're getting married. Who knew? As the bunding goes up and excitement builds, we go to Hawaii, where eruptions of the Kilauea volcano are getting bigger, higher and hotter. The government points the finger at Tonga, saying it's a key transit route for meth coming into New Zealand, a $40 million funding boost for arts and culture in Invercargill. And what makes an organic product organic? Calls for a national standard.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. The budget's $1 billion boost for schools has failed to satisfy teachers. They say the 1.6% increase to operations grants and $270 million extra for special education are not enough. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Teachers in Wellington told RNZ News today the budget was flat and disappointing. They say the government was well briefed on the problems facing schools while in opposition and had promised to deliver. But its first budget paid only lip service to their worries. Teachers say they had hoped for action on the workload and pay issues that are driving teachers to quit, as well as even more money for special education. The government says the budget provided the biggest increase in education spending in more than a decade. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
A senior police officer has paid tribute to the victims of the quarry attacker and repeat rapist. Today, Colin Jack Mitchell was sentenced to preventive detention with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. The 60-year-old left his badly beaten victim at a quarry after kidnapping her from an Auckland street. He was convicted of kidnapping, grievous bodily harm and assault with intent to sexually violate. Detective Senior Sergeant Kim Libby says the victim showed courage and dignity throughout the court process.
One of these victims has spent 25 years looking over her shoulder without being able to get any closure. While sentencing today does not mean that that pain will go away, hopefully they can provide her with some level of comfort.
Detective Senior Sergeant Kim Libby. DNA evidence also tied Mitchell to an unsolved rape 25 years ago, and he was previously convicted of the rape of a sex worker in 1985. Mitchell will have to prove he is no longer a threat to the community before he's released. The government is warning that the Pacific Islands are a key transit point for methamphetamine coming to New Zealand and is singling out Tonga. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Shane Jones says Tonga has a high level of indebtedness and needs enormous help with its customs service. He says it is a transit point for meth and other drugs coming to New Zealand and that its essential governance and institutions are strengthened in the region. The Drug Foundation says drug syndicates have so much money they have undermined democracies in other parts of the world and the government is right to be wary. The United Nations says the Pacific is a key transit point for cocaine from the Americas and meth and its precursor chemicals from Asia. National says the government needs to focus on the origin of the drugs, not just the transit points. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
The police in Malaysia say they've made a huge seizure of cash, jewellery and designer handbags during raids on homes and offices linked to the former Prime Minister Najib Razak. Mr Najib and his wife were banned from leaving Malaysia after he lost power in elections last week. The BBC's Steve Jackson reports.
Malaysian detectives say their haul included 72 bags of jewellery and cash in various currencies, along with 284 boxes containing luxury branded handbags. They say they have yet to establish the total value of the items, but describe the seizures from 6 separate properties as massive. Mr Najib has always denied any wrongdoing over allegations that millions of dollars were stolen from 1MDB, a state development fund he set up and ran.
Steve Jackson reporting. Organic producers, importers and consumers have met with the Ministry for Primary Industries in Wellington to discuss the need for a national standard. Of the top 25 countries that trade organically, Australia and New Zealand are the only two with no national standard to ensure products are organic. Up to $2,000 can be charged for auditing by certifying organisations in order to get an organic stamp of approval. But Brian Wilson from the ministry says a regulation could help the industry grow internationally. Mr Wilson says 7 more meetings will be held across the country over the next few weeks. The Sustainability Trust is applauding a move by the Warehouse to start using compostable bags, but says shoppers should still aim to reduce plastic consumption. The Warehouse Group is switching plastic bags for compostable ones by the end of the year. It says it made the change in response to consumers saying they want bags available when they're shopping. GNS says an earthquake just south of the Kermadec Islands this afternoon would have shaken a few feathers in the nature reserve, but it's unlikely to have been felt in New Zealand. The duty seismologist Natalie Balfour says the quake, which hit about 1:45, measured 6.2 on the Richter scale, so it wasn't strong enough to trigger a tsunami.
10 k's is quite shallow. Normally that would be something that we would we're always concerned about is shallow earthquakes, but the magnitude is not such that would cause displacement of the seafloor.
Dr Balfour says, however, the quake may have triggered so-called ghost events in the local monitoring system, which made it look like something was happening closer to New Zealand. It's 5:05. Sport. The Warriors will be without two key playmakers for tonight's National Rugby League match against competition strugglers Parramatta. Sean Johnson is missing for the second week in a row with an ankle injury, while skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck hasn't travelled to Sydney as his partners are expecting their first child. The side's looking to bounce back from a surprise 32-0 loss to the Roosters last round, and coach Stephen Kearney says they won't be caught off guard by the Eels, who sit at the bottom of the table with just 2 wins from 10 games.
In this competition, it's about picking yourself up and addressing and owning your performance and owning what it looked like on Saturday night for us, and we addressed that the next morning, the next day with our review process, and worked on a way forward.
Coach Stephen Kearney. The match kicks off at 8 p.m. Smarting from a surprise loss to Super Rugby easy beats the Sunwolves, the Hurricanes are anticipating a fired-up Queensland Reds side for tonight's Super Rugby match in Wellington. The Reds were trounced 63-28 by the Sunwolves in Tokyo last round. The Hurricanes, meanwhile, have won 19 of their last 20 games at home and haven't lost to an Australian team at home for 3 years. The Egyptian football star Mohamed Salah's boots are to be put on display in the British Museum. They'll be on display in the Egyptian collection alongside ancient statues from the age of the pharaohs. Salah scored a record 32 Premier League goals for Liverpool this season. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life follows a race which pits humans against horses. Our something for the weekend is the 2018 Transalpine Scooter Rally. Sort of two-stroke version of the Coast to Coast. And speaking of two strokes, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to grass on account of it being the birthday of this.
And for an eclectic mix of music, news, interviews and anything else we can squeeze into the hour, join me for Lately. After the extended news bulletin at 10, I'll be talking current affairs, foreign affairs, politics, music and the arts. For an eye on the world, Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11, weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty fine today. Occasional rain from tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Manawatu, including the central high country. A few showers turning to rain tomorrow morning. Heavy for a time with possible thunderstorms in the west, then clearing in the evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, brief light rain tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington also Wairarapa, rain developing tonight, clearing tomorrow morning, then fine spells. Bulla and Western Nelson, rain becoming persistent and heavy this evening, then easing to showers overnight. Marlborough and the remainder of Nelson, isolated showers turning to rain this evening, then clearing early tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, occasional showers. Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Otago and Southland, showers about coastal Southland, spreading everywhere for a time tomorrow morning with hail possible. The Chatham Islands, fine today, rain tomorrow. It's 5:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up tonight, we're going to look at the budget through the eyes of sector groups and groups of people who had high hopes for it, not all of whom were terribly pleased by what they got. So that is coming up throughout the program tonight. Actually, we have 4 reports on the budget from our specialist correspondents. Thank you for being with us. We begin tonight in Auckland with a Riverhead quarry attacker, a repeat rapist, will now likely die behind bars. 60-year-old Colin Jack Mitchell was today sentenced to preventive detention with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. But the 10 years doesn't mean as much as the preventive detention bit. In real terms, the sentence means he can't be released until he proves he's no longer a threat to society. Mitchell is a recidivist who continues to deny his offending. His refusal to take responsibility means he will not be eligible for rehabilitation courses inside prison, making parole almost impossible. And this situation is unlikely to be altered by the fact he has bladder cancer. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Colin Jack Mitchell had gloves, a mask and a pool cue in the back of his car when he left his Onehunga flat in the early hours of February 26 last year. He was planning a sexual attack and it wasn't his first. Justice Fitzgerald said Mitchell drove into town and found a young drunk woman walking by herself. He got her into his car and drove her to a quarry in Riverhead, northwest of Auckland.
The first memory she has of these events is coming to find herself in the quarry, wearing only her underwear, with you standing over her in your mask.
The victim touched her head and it was bleeding. Mitchell began shouting orders at her and she managed to scramble away to call police. CCTV cameras in town showed a car matching Mitchell's had been in the area when the victim was picked up, and the same car was caught on cameras at the quarry site. The police also found gloves at the scene. One of them had Mitchell's DNA inside them. Mitchell's explanation that he had only tried the gloves on in a shop was rejected by the jury. The DNA in the gloves also linked him to a previously unsolved rape from 1992. Mitchell picked a woman up as she walked home from town and dropped her on Rosebank Road in the Auckland suburb of Avondale.
You ambushed her from a hiding place behind a tree. You punched her in the face and in the head, enough to stun her but not to drop her, and then you put her in a headlock.
He dragged her down a driveway behind a factory and raped her. Mitchell claimed the sex was consensual, a story the jury did not believe. He also has convictions for the rape of a sex worker in 1985, whom he threatened with violence. Justice Fitzgerald said 2 experienced health assessors found Mitchell was a high risk of reoffending.
In my view, there is a clear and disturbing pattern of serious sexual offending by you over a period of some decades. There is also a clear similarity between the nature of your offending, including its predatory nature, offending against strangers, seeking out vulnerable victims, associated violence, threats of further violence if instructions are not carried out, and in more recent times, removal of your victims to remote locations to prevent detection.
Mitchell told one health assessor he didn't see any point in taking part in rehabilitation for sex offenders. Justice Fitzgerald said Mitchell posed a serious risk to the community and his advancing age had not made him safer. He remained stony-faced as the victim read out a suppressed victim impact statement and Justice Fitzgerald passed sentence. Outside court, Detective Senior Sergeant Kim Libby paid tribute to Mitchell's victims, who showed strength and courage.
One of these victims has spent 25 years looking over her shoulder without being able to get any closure. While sentencing today does not mean that that pain will go away, hopefully they can provide her with some level of comfort.
Mr Libby said the incident in Riverhead had dramatic effects on the Rodney and Riverhead communities. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gay aho.
5:12. We turn now to the budget 27 hours on. How has the dust settled? Well, it depends who you ask. We hear from people in the education sector next. But first, to look at the numbers. Accusations over which political party spent more or would have spent more and how it was spent have been flying back and forth in the post-budget mop-up. Politicians from Labour and National addressed business leaders today to either praise or critique yesterday's numbers. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson.
The Finance Minister fronting up to a business lunch in Wellington, making the case for his first budget and fielding questions from the audience. Though, it must be said, not many.
It's a perfect budget. I knew it was.
Not according to National. This is the tax and spend budget, it says. It's borrow and hope. The chief attack lines are as follows: broken promises and bad priorities.
There's one word to describe it: Winston.
National's leader Simon Bridges says the government's funnelled money into portfolios overseen by New Zealand First and its leader Winston Peters. For example, nearly $1 billion in foreign aid and foreign affairs.
And you make all sorts of arguments actually about how that's not a bad thing to do, albeit I'd say when you're not doing the universally cheaper GPs you promised, when you're not funding mental health that you promised, it's kind of a strange priority.
The government has put up some funding for mental health, $10.5 million over 3 years for a project for 18 to 25-year-olds. But it's also taken the $100 million pool which National had set aside and folded it back into the wider health budget. Here's the Health Minister, David Clark.
What I will say about that $100 million that was talked about before, that was never appropriated. So that's kind of ghost money. We're actually spending money on mental health and we're making a start. Of course there'll be more to do, but I'm really proud of the start we've made.
The government's also waiting to hear back from its mental health inquiry in October. National has also turned its sights on the entire health budget, yesterday's biggest headline winner.
Actually, in health, I could make the case quite clearly to you. They are dollar for dollar doing a bit less.
But National is including a one-off pay equity settlement, which the courts ordered it to pay last year. If you take that out, Labour is spending roughly $1 billion more than National in this budget.
You've got to compare apples with apples.
Here's another attack line you may have heard on the radio this morning from National's finance spokesperson, Amy Adams.
We certainly wouldn't have cut $200 million from Pharmac as this budget's done.
Fake news. In terms of Pharmac, they've actually put a statement out to clarify that what we're doing is putting them in charge of the overall pharmaceutical purchasing. Their bulk buying power means that they will be able to generate what they project to be those savings over the next 4 years. The actual budget for the combined pharmaceutical budget's actually gone up, and so we're very pleased with what we've been able to do there.
With both parties at each other's throats, the irony is, in many ways, it's a budget which looks like it could have been delivered by either National or Labour. But Grant Robertson says this is just the beginning. Next year he'll be back with budget number 2. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Often the response to budgets is divided along tribal lines, but in education some groups that had high hopes for Labour were pointedly underwhelmed. Education budget a major disappointment for educators, said the NZEI. And as our education correspondent took stock, he found many in the sector saying the government's 1.6% increase to operations grants, an extra $270 million for special education just isn't enough all up. They also say the budget hasn't addressed the workload and pay problems that are driving the teacher shortage. So, looking at all of that, here is John Gerritsen.
In the staff room at Wellington's Berhampore School today, teachers don't have anything good to say about the budget. Andy McKegg says the Labour Party raised expectations while in opposition, and it's fallen short now it's in power.
Before they came into government, they promised they would start fixing these elements of education and health. I don't know anything about health, but they're not going to make any changes whatsoever in education, especially because they're just putting band-aids on the problem by throwing money at learning support without actually addressing a system that doesn't work properly.
Michelle McCracken says Jacinda Ardern's government has ignored the problems raised by schools in recent years.
We've been going to the government quite often with the issues that we're having, not just our own pay, but just the way schools are being run, and it's just disappointing to see that there's not enough being done. You don't want to say it's lip service, but it starts to feel like lip service when the same problems are being brought to the government's attention and nothing's being done to help solve them.
Relief teacher Marlena Myers says a high workload drove her out of full-time teaching, and the budget has done nothing to entice her back.
So I've actually taken a year's leave off my full-time job to go relieving to have a sort of a work-life balance. So if I'm looking at that in terms of what the budget offers, it doesn't change, I don't think, my predicament in terms of workload for teachers, increase in salary to retain and keep good quality teachers, because I'm halfway out the door.
The Educational Institute is currently in pay talks for primary teachers. One of the negotiators is Liam Rutherford, an intermediate school teacher from Palmerston North. The government set aside an as yet unknown amount of money for the pay settlement, but Mr Rutherford says it still should have delivered more yesterday.
I think it's pretty flat, actually. I guess we were a bit disappointed with where this is going to leave schools. I think at best what this is saying is that schools are in a position to stand still for another 12 months, but in actual fact that negates the fact that the crisis ahead of us needs immediate impact now, and there's nothing in the budget that would suggest that's coming.
Another of the union's members is Tute Porter-Samuels, a special needs coordinator and deputy principal from Wainuiomata. She says the budget's $270 million boost for children with special needs is nowhere near enough.
It's a drop in the bucket of what we really need. Yeah, thank you for the money that we've gotten for oars, but actually it needs to be at least double that, because as it is with what's been given, we're still going to have to pitch children against other children to see who's got the greatest needs, when in fact all of these kids deserve that support.
Tute Porter-Samuels says the government promised a lot for education and it's failed to deliver. Back in the Beehive, Education Minister Chris Hipkins says the budget provided the biggest increase in education spending in more than a decade. And he says the boost in special education funding is more than 3 times the previous budget's new spending in that area and goes a long way towards addressing financial and demand pressures. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
We're going to return to the budget before 6 o'clock. Todd Nile is going to look at housing, and our Te Manu Kōrehi team is going to look at what it did or didn't do for Maori. I think a kick in the guts is one of the phrases used. That's coming up. After days of quakes and earth-cracking fissures, there's been an explosive eruption from the summit of Hawaii's Kilauea volcano. The eruption sent an ash cloud spewing more than 9,000 metres into the air, with people living over a large area around the volcano put under an ash fallout alert. Scientists warn it could just be the start of many similar eruptions over the next couple of days. With more, here's the BBC's James Cook.
In the dead of night, Kilauea exploded, and a cloud was rising 30,000 feet into the sky. The blast had been brewing for weeks, if not years. Kilauea is one of the world's most active volcanoes. It's been erupting constantly since the 80s.
It's a real dynamic situation up there. We could have additional, events like this morning that punch up and then die back down really quickly. The one this morning was definitely the biggest we've seen so far, just in terms of energy and how high up into the atmosphere it got.
On the ground, fissures continue to fizzle and boom. Parts of the island have been ablaze for weeks. There is no way to stop the lava oozing from the cracks in the earth. It consumes everything in its path, including at least 26 homes. And still, there is no end in sight. The seething magma in Kilauea's crater is now draining into the water table, producing steam and, scientists predict, more powerful and dangerous explosions at any moment.
That report from the BBC's James Cook. It's 5:21. The bunting is up. Isn't bunting a lovely word? And excitement is building in Windsor as thousands of Royals fans pour into the town to secure a spot for tomorrow's royal wedding between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. A dress rehearsal was held overnight, believe it or not. The wedding has been overshadowed in recent days by confusion over whether Meghan's father Thomas would attend. It's now been confirmed by Kensington Palace he won't, due to health concerns. They're saying the question now is who will be walking Meghan up the aisle? The ABC's James Glenday is in Windsor.
In the shadow of Windsor Castle, the pomp and pageantry Britain is known for was put on display. Members of the military paraded through the streets, a final bit of preparation for this weekend's royal wedding. Fans and tourists watched on. A few waved flags. Many were saddened by the news that Meghan Markle's father would no longer be taking part in the celebration.
I think she'd be really, really upset about it. I really do. And because we all would, wouldn't we, if our fathers couldn't go to the wedding. So, yeah, I think she'd be really upset about it.
There have been doubts for days about Thomas Markle's attendance. He's thought to be in Mexico, where he was caught up in a controversy after allegedly staging photographs with the paparazzi. And recent reports suggested he had to undergo heart surgery. Confirmation he'd missed the celebration came in a statement from Ms Markle herself. She said she had always cared for her father and hoped he could now be given the space he needed to focus on his health. It's unclear who will walk her down the aisle.
I'm sure they'd be able to find somebody who'd be willing. Wouldn't have to ask many people to give her away.
The royal family will now no doubt want to shift the media focus to the ceremony itself. In the chapel where it'll all take place, the choir rehearsed, and the Dean of Windsor, the Right Reverend David Connor, who will preside over proceedings, praised the couple.
My impression is that they love one another very much. They're very committed to each other. They're very serious about their relationship, and that's why I think they particularly want to see it grounded in a religious ceremony.
The wedding is being billed as an intimate event. Prince Harry is now just sixth in line to the throne after all, but royal reporters like Emily Nash from Hello magazine say it was always going to attract huge numbers of curious fans.
And of course it's within the grounds of Windsor Castle, which automatically means it's more private. But there is such an enormous global interest in the couple that I think the whole world is going to be tuning in various mediums on the day.
The build-up to this event was meant to be carefully stage-managed and gradually crescendo towards the big day, but speculation surrounding Meghan Markle's dad saw the news cycle slip from the palace's normally tight control. As the finishing touches are put on plans for Saturday, it'll probably be hoping that the unexpected drama will be obliterated in the public's memory by the grandeur of the wedding itself.
That was James Glenday in Windsor. We're going to go there live now. We were delighted to say we're joined by CNN's Anna Stewart, who was there. Anna, in fact, you are working like, I don't know, a proverbial hard worker because you've just been filing live for CNN describing the crowd there. So, so thank you for dropping CNN for RNZ. We're delighted. But who is there?
It's great. You know what? I'm actually standing right in the grounds of Windsor Castle today, and I can only hope that this conversation isn't going to wake up Her Majesty because she's sleeping at Windsor Castle at the moment. We're ready for the wedding. But the whole plan's been crazy, John. I mean, there are fans who've been camping out here for 3 days, and the temperatures are Baltic. It's about 7 degrees right now. I can see my breath. Yeah.
And so, who are they, and where have they come from? I guess we have this lovely sense of them being elderly and slightly dotty with hankies on their heads and lots of flags. But I'm looking at the pictures in your report, and that's not the case at all. It's a hell of a mixture, isn't it?
It is a right old mix, actually. We've got people from all over town. A lot of journalists. I even saw some Kiwis recently, John. But there are some old fans. I met an 83-year-old chap called Terry, who I see at every single Royal event. He's been doing it for decades. And he's 83, but he's been sleeping out here in these temperatures for 3 nights, got 1 more night left. He says all he does is, take out his hearing aid, and he can't hear anything. He's all fast asleep.
And Anna, what is it that appeals? I mean, we don't want to get metaphysical on Terry's behalf, but what is it that makes him so attracted to these occasions?
I know, there's this lure to the royal family. Unlike anything else, it's not like celebrity, it's different. It's something to do, I think, with the fact that the royal family are always held at an arm's distance. They are these wonderful, glamorous people. They have a very strong control of the media, so we don't see them all the time. It's always controlled, they're always graceful, and, it's very rare that you get to see them. So at an event like this, where you get to see them just after they got married, a really personal sort of time, that really draws people in. Of course, this week, we've had a bit more drama than we were going to expect, not from the royal side, but from the Markle side.
Yeah, although I reckon in some rather wonderful way that makes it kind of more ordinary, doesn't it? I mean, there's always someone in the family that will embarrass you on the, behave atrociously on the eve of the wedding. That's just how these things go. You're filing for CNN, and of course Meghan Markle is from the other side of the Atlantic. So is there really big interest in this from America?
Definitely. There is more interest, I think, in this royal wedding than the last one. I feel like from the people I've spoken to, because they can really relate to Meghan. She's American. She's a hard worker. She grew up with a very normal background in the US. She's really brought the whole fairy tale princess story for people to life. And you're right, family drama is part and parcel of every wedding.
Yeah,
it's quite rare that it gets played out like this across the international media. But, people empathise with that. People have been really empathising with Thomas Markle, with Meghan, the situation. Everyone just wants it to be the best day. There's a lot of love, I've noticed. There's not as much sort of cynicism and hate as you might expect if you looked at the tabloids. There's actually a lot of empathy and love, at least from the people I've spoken to so far.
Anna Stewart, thank you so much for breaking away from Filing Live.
Thanks for having me.
It was a treat. Anna Stewart busting out of her paying job at CNN to come and join us on RNZ. It's 28.5 minutes past 5, just before the 5:30 headlines. A man arrested for the assault of a jogger in Auckland St Mary's Bay has also been charged with other crimes in the area. The woman was throttled and dragged into the bushes while out on an early morning run near the Northern Motorway last Friday. A passing cyclist tried to get help, but the attacker got away. The cyclist does appear to have interrupted the attack, though. A 33-year-old has today been charged with assault with intent to commit sexual violation. Rowan Quinn reports.
The police say the other earlier crimes had already been reported, but officers only linked them after they started investigating the attack on the jogger. Detective Senior Sergeant Glenn Baldwin says they had a strong response from the public to CCTV footage of the offender and had a major breakthrough yesterday.
As a consequence of that development, last night and through the night, we deployed staff personnel into the lower CBD and St Mary's Bay area. Staff are actively seeking our target, and I can confirm that at 4 a.m. this morning, He was located in the CBD.
The man's also been charged with offensive behaviour and being unlawfully on a property in connection with 2 incidents at the start of May. The police let the jogger know about the arrest this morning.
It's a very, very traumatic incident. She's very appreciative of our efforts and the quick resolution of that. But she is a courageous woman and she's had a tough week. But this matter is still ongoing for her and obviously for the prosecution process.
Officers have also contacted the cyclist who encountered the assault on his way to work. Glenn Baldwin says he's delighted someone's been arrested.
You know, his timing at arrival at that incident was very fortuitous and, you know, he acted instinctively and very bravely and courageously chased the assailant off. You know, he was upset that he couldn't do more, yet he'd done an awful lot to save our victim.
He says the cyclist and the jogger are both still shaken. They haven't seen each other since the attack and plan to meet.
He was obviously pleased to help, but by the time he returned to where he had seen her, she had gone because she had run to the police station. So it's prudent that they meet.
The arrested man's appeared in the Auckland District Court this afternoon. I Tāmaki Makaurau mō Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint, we are going back to the budget, and a Maori community leader did indeed describe yesterday's budget as a kick in the guts. We'll hear more shortly. A $40 million funding boost for arts and culture in Invercargill. And what makes an organic product organic? Not just because you say it is. Calls for a national standard so we know what we're dealing with. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ in our Facebook. And our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona has Friday night business in a wee bit. But before it all, the headlines with Katrina.
The budget's $1 billion boost for schools hasn't failed to satisfy teachers who say it hasn't addressed the workload and pay problems driving the teacher shortage. Teachers say the 1.6% increase in school operations grants and the extra $270 million for special education are not enough. The government says it's made the biggest increase in education spending in more than a decade, but teachers are worried the budget has done nothing to help. Many Maori have expressed disappointment following yesterday's budget announcement. The government will invest $37 million into papakainga housing, rangatahi employment and whenua Māori reforms. But there's no extra funding for whānau ora, and Tupuni Kokori will lose $3 million from baseline funding every year. Māori community providers say it represents broken promises for some of the country's most vulnerable. A senior police officer has paid tribute to the victims of the quarry attacker and repeat rapist Colin Jack Mitchell. He was today sentenced to preventive detention after being convicted of kidnapping, grievous bodily harm and assault with intent to sexually violate. DNA evidence also tied Mitchell to an unsolved rape 25 years ago, and he was previously convicted of rape in 1985. Detective Senior Sergeant Kim Libby says the victims showed courage and dignity throughout the court process. The police in Malaysia have made a huge seizure of cash, jewellery and designer handbags during raids on homes and offices linked to the former Prime Minister Najib Razak. Mr Najib and his wife were banned from leaving Malaysia after he lost power in elections last week. The Mental Health Foundation wants caregivers to engage with the TV series 13 Reasons Why. Series 2 launches tonight. The chief censor has rated the show RP18, meaning any younger people watching need to be supervised. The foundation's chief executive, Sean Robinson, says parents or guardians should use the opportunity to talk to young people about suicide. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. Back on the budget in a sec, but before it all, Nona Peltier, seated beside me with something on your wrist. Are you right there, Nona?
Yeah, you know, a little fracture.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, soldiering on. Thank you,
As
Nona.
you do.
Let's talk business. The administrators of the beleaguered insurance company CBL Corporation adjourned a creditors meeting this afternoon after it became apparent there would be a voting stalemate. What's all this about?
You know, CBL Corporation is that insurance company that we've been talking about for a while. Yeah. And it's pretty difficult story to tell. For one thing, a lot of what's going on is happening behind closed doors. The whole thing about disclosure has really, the rules have been convoluted, to say the least. In fact, just yesterday, the Financial Markets Authority said they're going to ask the courts to rule on how does continuous disclosure rules fit in with companies that are in voluntary administration, because we really don't know very much. And today, we found out from the administrators that there was a meeting of creditors, a watershed meeting, but they had to adjourn it because even though 75% of the creditors by value would have supported a vote to put the company, this is the group, into liquidation, 50% of the actual number wouldn't agree. And so there, yes, exactly. And then they say, well, and that's related parties. But you never know enough to really tell a proper story. So in telling it, we've got to be very careful. Yeah. And we know that it doesn't involve all of the companies. This particular action only involves the corporation itself. Anyway, the meeting's been adjourned until July 2nd or sooner, depending. And I guess we're going to, well, we won't know, but we can assume, I think, that there'll be a lot of negotiations behind the scene because there was another resolution to put the company back into the hands of the directors. We don't know what's going to happen with this, but believe me, we're going to continue to cover it the best way we can.
Thank you, Nona, and it's good that the FMA is seeking some clarity around what happens in this situation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Large American investment fund, Blackstone, spending $635 million to buy prime commercial real estate in Auckland.
Yes, a bunch of buildings, I think 7 of them, in fact. They call them low-rise office buildings, but they're quite fancy. One of them is occupied by Fonterra, and the other one by Air New Zealand. There's a number of them in the group. So
both Fonterra and Air New Zealand are down by the viaduct, aren't they? And then Wynyard Quarter.
Yeah, the Wynyard Quarter, right on Fanshawe Street. Yeah. They're beautiful buildings, and I've had the opportunity to be inside both of them, and they are lovely facilities. Those buildings were not for sale, but there are so many global investors looking for opportunities to invest in New Zealand premium property. Now, that is premium property. We're talking about properties that are worth more than $100 million, not under $100 million. And but there's hardly anything on the market. So this particular organization, which is a big fund manager, Blackstone, just came knocking on Goodman's door and said, would you sell? Now, Goodman owns 51% of this company, of these buildings, with its partner, the Singapore government. In fact,
Holy moly.
Yeah. So anyway, look, these buildings have been owned by them for maybe, I don't know, a few years. But anyways, twice what they invested in initially. So big profit there for Goodman. And believe me, there's a lot of other people in the market looking too.
Extraordinary story, that. More jobs at Auckland Airport. Tell us about that, Nona.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So Auckland Airport say that there's going to be 370 jobs up for grabs in the food and beverage area of their new updated airport. They've introduced 21 new outlets this is restaurants and bars and so on into the airport. They're going to need a lot of staff. They're going to need not just serving staff, but managers and so forth. Yeah, 370, and this is starting to roll out from June. So there's going to be 21 new outlets, and 6 of them are being redeveloped. So it's going to be pretty fancy. It's going to be a destination for more than just travel, I guess.
300 and how many jobs?
370, which is mostly for, I guess, people in South Auckland will have an opportunity to apply close to home and so on.
Absolutely. What happened on the markets to end the week?
Okay, so, our index rose 0.6%, which is a pretty good rise. 54 points up to 8,657. Our dollar is steady at 68.8 US cents, 91.6 Australian, and 51 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed, and have a great weekend. Thank you. Let's return to the budget. Housing sector groups call it a start to tackling the housing crisis, but say the goals are too low and may not even be achieved. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says the shortage of homes, especially in Auckland, will get worse despite what he calls the biggest investment yet in public housing. Mr Twyford faced around 100 representatives from the housing sector in Auckland today, pitching the multi-billion-dollar housing commitment. And our Auckland correspondent, Todd Nile, was there.
The budget promises an extra 6,400 state homes over the next 4 years. More than half of those will be in Auckland, which is estimated to have a shortfall of more than 40,000 homes. Phil Twyford acknowledges that in Auckland, most of the promised homes were already included in the plans of major players such as Housing New Zealand and the Tamaki Regeneration Company.
Those promises weren't properly funded, and so they plan to redevelop some of the Housing New Zealand
properties in Auckland.
So the achievement is finding the money for the plans that are there?
Yeah, we've developed not only a plan that will deliver 6,400 new homes, it's fully funded.
But the Salvation Army's Major Campbell Roberts says the 6,400 state houses nationwide won't even meet today's waiting list of 8,000.
I don't think that the present waiting list is going to go down. In fact, I would expect it to go up further. So that would give an indication that actually there does need to be more resourcing going into state housing provision at this stage.
Phil Twyford agrees things will get worse before they get better.
It's why we've put a lot of effort into putting a package of measures together for winter 2018, more emergency and transitional housing, more public housing and housing first.
Some in the community housing sector aren't convinced the budget will help their building programs. Mr Twyford says a third of the 1,600 new state homes each year would be built by community providers. Peter Jeffries, who heads Auckland provider Court, says their annual build of 100 homes has dried up along with funding, and only part of what the minister says stacks up.
The arithmetic does, yep, but we're wanting to see where the money for that is coming from, and that's our concern. Today we received some assurance that it was there, but hey, unless you see the money, it's always a concern.
The key initiative is the start of the Kiwi Build program, with 100,000 so-called affordable homes to be built over the next decade. The minister expects the build rate to climb from 1,000 this year to 5,000 the next, and then 10,000 the year after. He disputes Treasury halving its forecast of the expected boost to the construction industry in the first years to $2.5 billion.
Treasury's numbers are not supported by MB's advice, and MB are far closer to the development industry and the implementation of Kiwi Build. So basically, I think Treasury have got this wrong, and it's unfortunate.
Housing strategist Leonie Freeman questions whether any of the targets, even the 1,000 Kiwi Build homes, can be met given the hurdles to rapidly increasing the current rate of home building.
Whether it's regulatory and compliance or consenting or providing certainty of supply or sorting out prefabrication, or just how do all the sector groups work together better and actually come together with some real leadership. So I'm still really concerned on the delivery side that we will turn these goals and aspirations, which I support, into reality.
Phil Twyford says he'd like to have been able to do more than the budget program provides, but he says while the housing crisis is a priority, there's a lot of other things that have to be done, and what's announced is a good start. I tamaki makoro mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Todd Nile tēnei.
Let's stay on the budget. A kick in the guts for Māori. That's how it's been described by one Maori leader, with Maori community providers saying it represented broken promises for some of the country's most vulnerable. There's no extra money for whānau ora, despite a $20 million election promise. And Te Puni Kokiri, the ministry which leads Maori public policy, is set to lose $3 million a year from its baseline funding. Looking at all of this, here's Te Manu Korehi reporter, Te Aniwa Hurihanganui.
The government has reassured Māori that a $37 million investment into papakainga housing, rangatahi employment and whenua Māori reforms is the key to improving Māori outcomes. On top of that, a $14 million investment over 4 years will help better integrate te reo Māori into schools. But Carmen Manuel from Muma Mo Te Rongoa, a whānau ora provider in Mangere, says it was heartbreaking to find out the budget didn't include any additional funding for the health and social service provider.
You know, I was thinking, oh yeah, the budget will be out. But to see that is really heartbreaking. I'm not sure about everyone else, but I'm just speaking from experience of working with our people here in South Auckland and what's this going to do for us and moving forward, looking at our rangatahi over there. It's just, I'm still trying to comprehend it.
Yesterday's budget also saw $3 million a year shaved from Te Puni Kokiri's budget. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says that money wasn't being used and is being redirected to other government priorities. Jackie Hohaya works with children with disabilities in South Auckland and says there wasn't enough targeted funding for Māori, especially for rangatahi.
It's a very broad, it's not really targeted, only in areas they think there's a shortage of teachers. I thought there would be more emphasis on certain areas for our kids, behaviour or Māori with learning. For us, we're looking at to improve academic writing for our students, Māori in particular, boys.
Maori lawyer and former Mana Party candidate Annette Sykes says the budget didn't go far enough for Māori.
Where is the rehabilitation centres? Where are the temporary shelters? Where are those that are suffering the most from the mental health system and the criminal justice system to get immediate assistance in this housing crisis? It seems like just a drop in the pond for the kinds of spend that is required to ensure parity of access of outcome of service and parity of equity of outcome for Māori that are suffering in health, education and housing.
The government is arguing that many of its already announced initiatives, such as its $5.5 billion families package, will benefit Māori. Crown Māori Relations Minister Calvin Davis says the package, which includes a boost to working for families, a winter energy payment and one for parents of newborns, will have a considerable impact on lifting Māori whānau out of poverty.
We've got $1.2 billion in the families package alone that will go to Māori. That's huge in anyone's books. We're really proud of this budget. It's laying a foundation. We can't undo the damage that the previous government, including the Māori Party, did to our people, but this is laying a foundation for the future. It's laying a foundation for Māori development into the future.
But so far, that Māori development appears to be one that isn't going to be specifically targeted. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui ahau.
14 minutes to 6. This changed the subject quite a lot. The government has pointed the finger at Tonga, saying it is a key transit route for meth and other drugs coming to New Zealand. The Associate Finance Minister, Shane Jones, says the government's $700 million boost to foreign aid in the Pacific will help strengthen institutions and governance in the islands and should help combat drug traffickers. But experts warn that drug syndicates have so much money they can easily undermine security and governments. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
At a post-budget breakfast in Wellington, Shane Jones was asked to explain the government's Pacific Reset strategy, where foreign aid is being boosted by roughly $700 million over the next 4 years. The former ambassador for Pacific Economic Development says the region's failed states are transit points for drugs, and it's in New Zealand's interests to help strengthen institutions and governance in the islands to combat drug traffickers.
Many of the problems that we're dealing with here, with pee and drugs, where do you think that's coming from, folks? That is coming from closely failed states in the Pacific. That is the transit route where a lot of this drama that is costing good, ordinary, middle class, upper class, lower class people inordinate pain and fear and anguish.
And Shane Jones pointed the finger directly at Tonga.
Tonga has a frightfully high level of indebtedness. Tonga needs an enormous amount of assistance with its customs. It is a transit point. I can't say too much about what the police may or may not have shared with us when I was an ambassador. But I have extraordinarily high fears about Pacific Island states being used as transit points for mischief and mayhem, eventually making its way to New Zealand.
The Drug Foundation's Executive Director, Ross Bell, says Shane Jones is bang on the button about the Pacific being a gateway.
So I think it is right to be wary of this risk because we've seen in other parts of the world where governments do come unstuck and are weakened by the fact that the drug trafficking syndicates have a ton of money and they can undermine democracies.
The United Nations recently warned that the Pacific Islands are a key transit route for meth and its precursor chemicals from Asia, and cocaine from North and South America on its way to New Zealand and Australia. National's Customs spokesperson Simon O'Connor says the government needs to look at the origins of the drugs, not just the transit points. But he says it would be wishful thinking to suggest New Zealand will ever get completely on top of the meth trade.
I think it is working. We are stopping, and certainly when we were in government we were stopping significant amounts coming through. But I think it's utopian to think that we could ever stop it at all. But as I say, I think it's quite right and proper that the government continues to push back and interdict these supplies as best it can.
The Tongan academic, Malaki Koloamatangi, says New Zealand's been helping Tonga with its customs service, but he doesn't think Shane Jones' description is accurate.
Every Pacific nation needs assistance in that area, particularly, for
screening and making sure that security is tight at entry points into the Pacific. And that's a work that's in progress. But, to point, out Tonga to say that there's this particular problem, I think is probably exaggerating.
Exaggeration or not, Shane Jones is well aware that the coalition government is under fire for allocating an extra $900 million in the budget for foreign aid and diplomats. And he'll be trying to convince voters why it's necessary at a time when teachers are crying out for a pay rise. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
The Invercargill City Council has this week approved $40 million in funding to reinvigorate arts and culture in the city. That news comes a little after, a month after Southland Museum and Art Gallery was forced to close due to earthquake risk, a move widely condemned by the city's residents. Supporters of the new spending say it will lead to a renaissance of arts in Southland, but critics say it shouldn't be a matter of one or the other, and the museum should stay open. In the meantime, here's our Otago Southland reporter, Timothy Brown.
When I meet Cherie Chapman outside the closed Southland Museum, dark clouds are forming overhead, a metaphor perhaps for the mood of the residents following the closure. Ms Chapman is one of a small but growing band of residents leading a protest against the council for closing the museum. They say legislation allows it to remain open, but the council has ignored that option.
I think it's appalling that we can't open the museum now. I do not understand, and none of us do, why they haven't reopened the museum, given the legislation allows them to do that. And it's disappointing that this council has decided that they're going to keep the museum closed and drip feed money into it, and eventually in 5 years open it. I don't think that's good enough.
Following the closure, the council has moved forward its planned redevelopment of the museum, and this week also approved funding for the Living Dinosaurs experience to house the facility's tuatara. It will also fund an art centre and redevelopment of Anderson Park, the city's art gallery, which closed in 2014. But Ms Chapman says the museum should remain open while the other facilities take shape. Ms Chapman says the council has lacked leadership on arts and culture for too long, and it might cost them their seats in next year's election.
Do you see this having a massive blowback for the council?
I do. I know that some senior members or long-term Invercargillites are really angry, people who are head of organisations, and they're saying, what on earth is this council doing? It will have a huge backlash.
But Invercargill's long-serving mayor, Tim Shadbolt, welcomes the challenge.
Protest is a privilege and a delight, and just part of that decision-making process, and I see it very positive. And if those people run for council or for the mayoralty, good on them, and they will then face the ultimate test of whether their ideas represent the masses of the people or not.
He says the council's plan is ambitious and will address the imbalance between sport and art in the city, and result in complete change of the city's heritage landscape in the next decade, including a redeveloped museum.
The ultimate vision is a new facility in a decade?
Yes, definitely, yeah. And several new facilities. So we're looking at a real renaissance in terms of the arts in the city, and I think we'll be able to achieve it.
The plan has been welcomed by Venture Southland. The organisation believes arts and culture will also help bring tourists from Invercargill's doorstep in Fiordland and Queenstown to the city. Venture Southland's General Manager of Tourism, Events and Community, Bobby Brown, says it is exciting for the city and the wider region.
These projects that the council, Invercargill City Council, is supporting are essential. So it's just awesome the council's got behind it. It's awesome that they're partnering with their community. I can't say how much more positive I am about it. I feel like it's a very exciting time for Invercargill and Southland.
Development of the facilities will be staggered, starting with the Living Dinosaurs facility in Anderson Park in the 2019-2020 financial year. Work on the museum will begin in 5 years' time. In Invercargill, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Organic producers, importers and consumers have met with the Ministry of Primary Industries in Wellington to discuss whether New Zealand is in need of a national standard for organic products. The meeting was the first of 8 set to happen across the country over the next few weeks. Of the top 25 countries who trade organically, Australia and New Zealand are the only two who don't have a national standard to ensure products are, in fact, organic. Our reporter Katie Scotcher and cameraman Richard Tinderlin went along to the meeting and spoke to those in the industry.
When you step into the Wellington chocolate factory, you're greeted by the whirring sound of machines and the sweet smell of chocolate. The factory has been open for 5 years and produces organic, ethically sourced and traded chocolate. The factory's production manager, Oliver Finlay, says all of their beans are grown organically without pesticides.
So we roast all the beans, we grind all the beans down into chocolate, generally in a dark chocolate, so 70% cocoa, 30% sugar. We try to source all ethically, so we do a lot of direct trade with farmers, which is better for the farmers. They get a lot more out of it. It's better for the development of the small countries as well, which is pretty cool.
The Wellington Chocolate Factory is one of 750 producers and manufacturers of organic produce certified by BioGrow. Being certified by an organisation like BioGrow is one of the only options for manufacturers who want to establish their organic credentials and involves a one-off cost of around $2,000. Certification involves auditing the way manufacturers produce, process and distribute their products. It ensures an organic product is free of additives and no chemicals were used during growth. If a company introduced a new product or changed suppliers, it would require a new certification. BioGrow's chief executive, Donald Nording, says a national standard would boost consumer confidence.
If I'm a consumer and I go and I want to buy organic eggs, for example, everybody eats eggs. Well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people eat eggs. I enjoy eggs and go to the supermarket. I know today that a lot of the eggs that claim to be organic aren't actually certified. So do we know if it's organic or not? That's a question that I think will be answered if we have a regulation and national standard.
Mr Nording says a national standard wouldn't affect those already certified by BioGrow. Wellingtonians shopping for organic food supported the idea of a national standard.
I guess you're paying a much higher price point and you want to know that if you're buying that it is actually certified.
I think go for it. I think we can all be safer.
So that you know exactly what is in the food. So you're not getting any additives, extras that you don't want.
Because then we know that it is organic and then we're not actually eating something that's full of pesticides or antibiotics and that sort of carry on.
Brian Wilson from MPI says set regulation could help the industry grow.
The main pro is it could give us a better access to other markets where organic regulation is required, and so those markets expect a level of reciprocal arrangements in New Zealand.
Mr Wilson couldn't confirm if the proposed regulation would cost producers and says that will need to be figured out during the consultation process. Organic consumers, retailers, importers and exporters have until the 11th of June to make submissions to the Ministry. In Wellington for Checkpoint, ko Katie Scotcher-Tene.
The World Health Organization is convening an emergency committee meeting in New York overnight to consider the international risks of an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has killed more than 25 people and infected nearly twice that number. The question, should they declare an international public health emergency? It is feared the latest outbreak of the deadly disease may be more than usually difficult to get under control. Here's the ABC's Jonathan Here.
At this university hospital in Geneva, health authorities are scrambling to get boxes of Ebola vaccine in the air and on their way to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ana Maria Henao Restrepo is from the World Health Organization.
I just want to say that it's 8,000 doses in total. The 4,000 here and the 4,000 in Kinshasa are just the first part. Merck, the vaccine manufacturer, has reassured WHO that we have access to further doses of vaccine as necessary during the outbreak.
Health authorities are racing against time to contain the Ebola outbreak in the Congo. The WHO believes so far about 44 people have been infected and 23 people have died. The disease was first spotted in the town of Bikoro, but it's now been discovered in the city of Mbandaka, a transportation hub. There are fears a large-scale epidemic could occur if it spreads via the Congo River to the capital, Kinshasa, a city of about 10 million people. An emergency meeting has been called to decide if the outbreak is to be considered a public health emergency of international concern.
So right now, the major concern is getting the trained people
to 2 different locations with all of the equipment and the materials that they need, including vaccines that are very promising but require cold chain, meaning they must be kept cold, which is quite the logistical lift in some of these places.
Associate Professor Julie Fisher is from Georgetown University in the United States. She's an expert on public health.
The challenge is that the strategy that is being proposed that has been shown to be effective is called ring vaccination, which sounds relatively simple. You vaccinate the people in a ring around someone who has been infected or others who have been exposed. Unfortunately, that's not quite as easy as it sounds. So that means that you have to do what is called contact tracing, find all the people who might have contacted someone who was infected, and then trace all of their contacts as well.
And Julie Fisher warns health authorities need to get a grapple on what they're dealing with in the next week.
That report from the ABC coming up to 6 o'clock after the news at 6. We're going to go back to the budget and look at what it means for Christchurch. Some of the big projects that Christchurch desperately wants and deserves to have sorted, going to be sorted as a result of the budget. And we're going to talk to Johnny Diamond from the BBC, one of my BBC favourites.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. Teachers are unhappy with the government's education budget, saying they expected it would deliver more. The government says it's made the biggest increase in education spending in more than a decade, including a $270 million boost for special education. Wellington teacher Michelle McCracken says the government has ignored problems teachers have been raising.
We've been going to the government quite often with the issues that we're having, not just our own pay, but just the way schools are being run. And it's just disappointing to see that there's not enough being done. You don't want to say it's lip service, but it starts to feel like lip service when the same problems are being brought to the government's attention and nothing's being done to help solve them.
Michelle McCracken says teachers feel that their voice has not been heard. Disappointment is widespread among Maori following yesterday's budget announcement. The government will invest $37 million into papakainga housing, rangatahi employment and whenua Maori reforms. But no additional funding has been set aside for whānau ora. And Te Puni Kōkiri, the ministry that leads Māori public policy, is set to lose $3 million from its baseline funding every year. The Māori lawyer and former Mana Party candidate Annette Sykes says the budget doesn't go far enough for Māori.
I did not see anything that gave me any comfort about how those that are at the sharp edge of neoliberalism, those that don't have work, those that are suffering, did not really get any greater access to resources in the budget yesterday, and my heart went out to them.
Māori lawyer and former Mana Party candidate Annette Sykes. A senior police officer has paid tribute to the victims of the quarry attacker and repeat rapist Colin Jack Mitchell. Today, Mitchell was sentenced to preventive detention with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years after being convicted of kidnapping, grievous bodily harm and assault with intent to sexually violate. The 60-year-old left his badly beaten victim at a Riverhead quarry after kidnapping her from an Auckland street. Detective Senior Sergeant Kim Libby says the victims showed courage and dignity throughout the court process. DNA evidence also tied Mitchell to an unsolved rape 25 years ago, and he was previously convicted of the rape of a sex worker in 1985. Mr Libby said the incident in Riverhead had dramatic effects on the Rodney and Riverhead community. The Drug Foundation says the government is right to be wary about the Pacific being a gateway for drugs. The Associate Finance Minister, Shane Jones, told a post-budget breakfast in Wellington today that the $700 million boost to foreign aid in the Pacific will help strengthen institutions and governance in the islands to combat drug traffickers. Mr Jones says failed Pacific states are transit points for methamphetamine and singled out Tonga as being a particular problem. The Foundation's Executive Director, Ross Bell, says the Pacific has traditionally been a transit route for drugs coming to New Zealand and Australia from North and South America, and the United Nations has also highlighted it as a problem. Mr Bell says drug syndicates have a ton of money and they can undermine democracies. The US President Donald Trump has contradicted a suggestion by his national security advisor John Bolton that the ending of Libya's nuclear program could provide a model for North Korea. The idea has alarmed Pyongyang, which has threatened not to attend a planned summit with the US President. The BBC's Barbara Pletasha reports.
Pyongyang had specifically targeted Mr. Bolton, angry at his suggestion that North Korea's nuclear program could be dismantled in a manner similar to that of Libya's. That is, Libya gave everything up and then got sanctions relief. The North Koreans don't like this approach, especially because Colonel Gaddafi fell from power a few years later with the help of a NATO air campaign. Mr. Trump emphasized that he was not operating according to a Libya model. He stressed instead that the deal he had in mind would give very strong protections to the North Korean leader.
Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington. A report that cost the Auckland Council nearly $1 million is inconclusive on whether a downtown stadium is worth pursuing. The Council has just released to RNZ the report by consultants PwC following the intervention of the Ombudsman. RNZ had requested the report in December and the Ombudsman found it was wrong to withhold it. The report suggests a new round of work is needed to explore possible funding options. The possible cost of a downtown stadium and where it might be built has been blacked out in the report. A small German brewery has been told to stop describing its beer as wholesome on the label. The Heile brewery in the southern German town of Leutkirch had argued that the word was simply an indication of quality. But the Federal Court of Justice upheld a lower court's judgment that it had connotations of health benefits. It's 6:05. Sport. Despite questions over the future of Wellington A-League football club the Phoenix, captain Andrew Durante has signed on for another season. The club has been subject to speculation over the past few weeks that it's going to be partly sold to Australian investors and the team could end up playing half of its home games in Sydney and the other half in Wellington. The club's general manager David Dome says while the speculation is not helpful, the re-signing of Durante, who turned 36 earlier this month, shows the Phoenix is committed to pulling together a squad for next season. He reaffirmed the club was not for sale, but rather seeking investors to ease the financial burden. Smarting from a surprise loss to Super Rugby easy beats the Sunwolves, the Hurricanes are anticipating a fired-up Queensland Reds side for the tonight's Super Rugby match in Wellington. The Reds were trounced 63-28 by the Sunwolves in Tokyo last round. The Hurricanes, meanwhile, have won 19 of their last 20 games at home, haven't lost to an Australian team at home for 3 years, and have won 9 games on the trot. But coach Chris Boyd is wary of a Reds backlash.
They wouldn't have been particularly happy with their performance last week, and the week before they beat a pretty good Lions side, so they're a little bit up and down, but they're a really capable roster, and I'm sure that would have got a fair old bollocking after the game in Japan, and I'm sure they're going to come out as hungry as.
Chris Boyd, go the Canes. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Norwegian literary phenomenon Karl Ove Knausgaard, for whom nothing is too intimate to write about, it seems. David Elliott Smith has made a documentary about the extraordinary celebrity culture in Japan and the lengths he went to become big in Japan. And US Arab writer Ramzi Baroud takes a hard and personal look at the continuing desolation of the Palestinians. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine today, occasional rain from tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Manawatu, including the central high country. A few showers turning to rain tomorrow morning, heavy for a time with possible thunderstorms in the west, then clearing in the evening. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, brief light rain tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, also wide at upper, rain developing tonight, clearing tomorrow morning, then fine spells. For Bulla and Western Nelson, rain becoming persistent and heavy this evening, then easing to showers overnight. Marlborough and the remainder of Nelson, isolated showers turning to rain this evening, then clearing early tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, occasional showers. Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Otago and Southland, showers about coastal Southland, spreading everywhere for a time tomorrow morning with hail possible. The Chatham Islands fine today with rain tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Katrina Batten. Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Have a fantastic weekend.
You too.
Right, when Meghan Markle marries Prince Harry tomorrow, she will change the royal family. In November last year, Afua Hirsch wrote about this for The Guardian from the position of being a black British woman. I quote, "I struggled growing up with the feeling that the monarchy were fundamental to Britishness, that the Britishness they represented was one that excluded me. This exclusion mattered. It made other people perceive being truly British and being black as incompatible identities. Well, there was more when in November 2016 Prince Harry issued a media statement attacking the racism Meghan Markle was experiencing. It was perhaps Britain's least diverse institution standing for diversity. So whatever you think of royal weddings, this marriage is different for the message it sends about what being British looks like. It's also different because it's been so painfully ordinary in some respects. The embarrassing family members blowing it, the best laid plans going pear-shaped. And that, as the BBC's wonderful Johnny Diamond told me, is what makes this wedding not just royal, but unique.
I think it is all of those things. It did go pear-shaped. There's simply no doubt about it. And it was astonishing because royal life is pretty well controlled, both by tradition and precedent, and by the fact that they're not really held accountable in the same way that, like, governments are. And they walk away from stories by saying, that's private, it's nothing to do with you. And to some degree, we all go, oh, okay, yeah, that is private, because we do treat them as a private family as well as this enormous celebrity-driven institution. So it went pear-shaped. It went off the rails because the palace communications people completely lost control of the narrative because they were entirely unused to there being separate sources of information in the form of Meghan Markle's dad apparently having a hotline to this American entertainment website, TMZ. And they weren't used to relatives speaking out as well, because normally relatives don't do that, of the nice English girls that have been married over the last 20 or so years. The relatives understand the deal. So pear-shaped, off the rails, but also it's something that happens in lots of weddings, in fact. If you think about it, everything is well organised, and you've done the kind of who's going to sit with everybody else, and you've worked out what the colours are going to be, and then suddenly the relatives arrive.
Yeah, that's right.
And it goes wrong, and it's just gone wrong. But, and we have to wait and see, there is a chance that this could turn into the most astonishing tale, because we still don't know who's going to accompany Meghan Markle down the aisle. We presume she will have someone and won't make that walk alone through St George's Chapel. But the sort of good money is heading towards her mother, Doria Ragland. And if it is Doria, it will be a breathtaking moment. St George's Chapel, I've been inside. It is this repository of 600 years of royal English and British history. It is incredibly ornate. You walk down through what's called the choir, which is where the choir sits, and you walk over the vault that contains the bones of Henry VIII and Charles I, and above you are the standards, the flags of the 24 Knights of the Garter. And then you get to the altar. And if it is Doria, you know, an African-American woman, a social worker, a descendant of slaves, who makes that walk, in some small way, Britain will always be different, and in a bigger way, the royal family will always be different. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, well, that's a good narrative. I like it, because viewed in those terms, you know, this isn't Fergie and Andrew and Edward and Sophie and Charles and Diana and Will and Kate. You know, in Brexit Britain, this is an expansion rather than a contraction. It's not the old firm endlessly repeating itself.
No, it's not. I mean, even if we hadn't had this astonishing week we've just had with Thomas Markle and then the strange relatives who don't appear to have talked to Meghan Markle for years and years, but speak confidently on her behalf and on behalf of other relatives. Even if we hadn't had that week, this was always a big, big deal because Meghan Markle is so different to the people who have been married by the royal family over the years. It's not that she's a foreigner. It's not that she's divorced. It is that she is part African-American and has talked about her identity. It is about the fact that she's had a job, which most of the previous brides didn't, a real job, that she actually had to struggle quite hard for. It is about the fact that she has a voice, and she's incredible at communicating, much better than anybody else in the royal family. And so all these things, suddenly it's like, wow, how did that happen?
And actually, I think that reflects well on Harry, doesn't it? I mean, at some level, you know, what a great woman he picked.
To be fair to Prince Harry, and, you know, a fair number of people have a go at him because he clearly isn't an intellectual. I don't mean that rudely. It's not me a way of saying he's stupid, because he's not. But, you know, he's not that interested in books. He was never that interested at school. He went off and served in the army and was pretty diligent about it. He has always dated strong, independent women. His mother, Diana, turned into a very strong, independent woman, an icon of strong, independent women. And it's not entirely surprising that he would end up with a very strong and very independent woman on the individual level. But it's very, very surprising on the royal family level, because that's simply not really what you've done.
Johnny Diamond from the BBC. A report which has cost the Auckland Council nearly $1 million that's right, nearly $1 million is inconclusive on whether a downtown stadium in Auckland is worth pursuing. The council has just released the report by consultants PwC to RNZ following the intervention of the Ombudsman. RNZ had requested the report last December. The Ombudsman found it was wrong for the council to withhold it. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile has been pouring through it and joins us now in the studio live here. Todd, let's first of all try and understand why it was so hard to get this damn thing. What's been going on and what does the report tell us?
Well, I mean, I've been trying to get it formally since December. And the council refused and got the Ombudsman involved, and there was resistance then to some of what the Ombudsman was doing. This was a report commissioned March last year. To my understanding, was delivered to the council's agency, Regional Facilities Auckland, in June, and essentially in the form that it has been released now. So, and they've been insisting that, oh, it's only a draft. This is a familiar story that we've had trying to get reports from the council. It's only a draft, it's not ready. And really, the timing has turned out to be quite peculiar. It's been run by the Mayor's office, and they've managed to stall it to the point where today they've managed to put it out, but at the same time, just managed to put out at the same time the new stadium strategy.
Right, so why do you think, and it's still, even now I'm looking at it on the desk there, it's a redacted copy, so it's not even the whole damn thing. Why didn't the council want you to have it?
I think possibly because of the cost, and also the conclusion of the report is very inconclusive.
Tell us the cost again.
So the cost was $930,000
for
this
a report.
Yeah. And when they commissioned it in March, they said, yeah, probably 250 to 500k tops, so $500,000 tops. It's come in nearly double what they expected it would cost them.
And in return for which, as you say, they get an inconclusive conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, they say that, you know, surprisingly, stadiums don't earn money, so that's one problem with it. There are some incredibly obvious options put in there. One is that there are several ways of funding it. One is the public pays, two is the private sector pays, three, it's a mixture of the two. The possible outcomes of going into the next stage of work. So this report concludes $930,000 later that the next stage would be to get a more detailed report looking at who the possible financial contributors might be, what the kind of arrangements might be. And the outcome of that work, they say there are two possibilities of the outcome of the next stage. One, it may be possible to reach agreement. Two, maybe it won't be possible to reach agreement and therefore the idea should die.
Sorry, just remind us again, just so we can all have a cheap shot laugh. How much did they pay for this?
$930,000.
Unbelievable. They've also put out a new strategy for Auckland stadiums. Is that right? Is there anything new in that?
Yeah, not really. So they've in the new stadium strategy, they've managed to put this notion of what they call an international stadium precinct. The Mayor, Phil Goff, has previously called it the National Stadium, which is a way of saying the government would have to pay for it. So going through and really, this whole process of the stadium strategy that they've been working on for years can't really happen until they resolve the future of Eden Park. The future of Eden Park is kind of linked into whether a downtown stadium is possible or not. So in the meantime, very little is going to change. Speedway is probably going to be out of Western Springs as planned after next summer. May get an extension if they can't nail down a shift somewhere else for them. QBE stays pretty much as it is. Footy, rugby, Mount Smart is still for the Warriors and the concert. So really not a lot of other stuff going on in the stadium strategy. Although the stadium strategy includes there may be this downtown stadium sometime in the future, 15, 20 years, who knows?
Todd Niall. Thanks so much, Todd. Tyler had to work really hard to get that report and get the Ombudsman involved. We appreciate it. Christchurch is one step closer to a new stadium after its long, slow rebuild got a $300 million boost in yesterday's budget. The Acceleration Fund for rebuild projects will include a roofed multi-purpose stadium, but there's also a $62 million sum set aside for the Christchurch Schools Rebuild program, funds to help an overburdened DHB, and an insurance tribunal for earthquake claims. In Christchurch, here's Rachel Graham.
The money is aimed at speeding up recovery projects and getting them finished ahead of the timeframes in the cost-sharing agreement with the Crown. The Christchurch City Council will need to apply to the government for the money. The Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, says the fund will be guided by what the people of Christchurch want, and while the projects will need satisfactory business cases, the government is not making decisions from Wellington. Joanna Norris, the Chief Executive of Christchurch NZ, the city's promotion organisation, says she's happy to see the decisions will be locally led and hopes the council will focus on the key anchor projects.
Finishing off some of these major anchor projects, and the stadium in particular, because of the value it brings in terms of providing a facility for major events and for high-profile sporting events, is really important for the confidence in our community. So it's not an either or. We absolutely must finish our horizontal infrastructure, our roads, our wastewater pipes, but also focus on the things that will take us forward as a community.
Leanne Watson, the Chief Executive of the Canterbury Chamber of Commerce, says they have made it clear to the council that they want them to focus on investing in infrastructure. But she says anchor projects, like the stadium, also count.
I think they are essential. I mean, all you've got to do is look at the likes of Ed Sheeran concert held in Dunedin a couple of months ago, which brought about $34 million into the Otago economy over the weekend. That we're missing out on that sort of thing. But not only that, it's also about providing a good quality of life for people living in Christchurch and Canterbury to be able to have that sort of facility available to them.
Economist Cameron Bagri from Bagri Economics gave an overview of the budget to a business lunch in Christchurch today. Mr Bagri says Christchurch needs to get the basics fixed in order to reassure people outside of the city that the rebuild is on track and to encourage investment.
First and foremost, you go for the necessities. It's same in regard to how you run a household. The necessities come first and the luxuries come second. So if you look at necessities across New Zealand at the moment, or within the Christchurch region, your roading infrastructure critically important. Stadium, nice to have, will be a big boost for Christchurch. It's a luxury. Let's focus on the necessities first and foremost.
The Methodist Missions Executive Director, Jill Hawkey, says projects like developing the red zone into a positive space for people would have huge benefits for the city's well-being. But she also hopes that the city's housing issues are not overlooked. Mrs Hawkey says while pressure on housing has eased in Christchurch, there are still a large number of people who are struggling, particularly people who formerly made use of the inner-city boarding houses which were destroyed in the quake. She says they are responsible for 120 houses, half of which they own, and they are nowhere near meeting demand.
Particularly for affordable accommodation, certainly in our rental accommodation for older people, we could rent those houses 5 times over. There's a real need for increased rental accommodation for older people, as well as families and single people.
The Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says the council will now begin to work out in more detail how the extra funding can be used to most benefit the city, and looks forward to meeting with the Minister. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
Right, whatever you think of royal weddings, and for some of you it's not that much, they're big business in the news business. If you Google Meghan Markle, you get 75 million results. There are 21 million news references to her. And as news organisations tell the story of her life, they invariably alight upon her former school, Immaculate Heart High, a Catholic girls' secondary school in LA. And then they turn up at her former school, which has found itself being visited by TV crews, photographers from places so far and wide they're providing an excellent geography lesson, really. And you can add the BBC's James Cook to the list of visitors.
At Meghan Markle's old school in Los Angeles, the festivities have begun early. A royal garden party, California style. There was even a corgi, as well as a double helping of red, white and blue.
I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think that she best represents our motto, our school motto, which is educating the hearts and minds of girls for 100 years. And through her humanitarian efforts through World Vision, I think that she best embodies that.
She's such an inspiration, definitely, to all, for princess reasons and for acting reasons, definitely.
Yeah, why is she an inspiration to you?
She's definitely an inspiration to me because she went to my school. She also went to my elementary school, too. And so I feel like I'm following in her footsteps, and it definitely makes it so inspiring because, like, you never know what could be next in your life, and for her, it's princess.
Well, this celebration is a curious combination of British tradition and American exuberance, and it also marks a golden PR opportunity for a family which carefully crafts the image which it projects to the world.
It's the BBC's James Cook. Well, not to be outdone by the BBC, we called Immaculate Heart High School ourselves, and we spoke to their chair of theology, no less. Decades at the school, Christine Knudsen.
Well, we're very proud of all of our alums. I've been at Immaculate Heart High School for 30 years, and we've seen a lot of young women come through our doors, and we're always happy when one of them does well or reaches some sort of accomplishment. But we've never had anyone marry a prince before, so this is kind of unusual.
No.
Since it's a world story, suddenly there has been world focus on Immaculate Heart, which is a little hectic, but also rather fun.
Yes, I've been looking, and you've had CNN there, Reuters, NBC, ABC, CBS, everyone's been popping in. What do the girls make of it all?
Well, in the beginning, it was rather overwhelming. We just decided to let the media come. After all, our school is in Hollywood, and they came, and we told the girls, if you want to talk to the media, then, you know, be polite, and if you don't, just walk away from the cameras. And but now that it's been several months, they're kind of used to it, so it's not that big of a deal anymore.
What do you remember of? Can you tell me, Christine, because you will know better than anyone, do you say Megan or Megan?
Megan.
And what do you remember of Megan?
I remember her first when she was in the 8th grade, and she was in every musical and play that Immaculate Heart had. We had 2 a year, and so I didn't teach her until she was a senior. And so even when she was in middle school and she was in the plays and musicals, I knew who she was. And she was wonderful. She could play any character. She just had you've heard maybe people say the Markle Sparkle. And she was just immensely talented. We knew she wanted to be an actress, and we thought she just might make it simply because she was so good.
And also driven, and that's an important message, because there's two messages here. One, that she is becoming a princess, but you need modernity for girls too, don't you? And she was profoundly successful. Suits is big television business, and she had a central role on it, and she got there because she worked at her craft and she was great at it.
Yes, she was, besides being talented, as an actress, she was incredibly bright, articulate, poised. I checked the transcripts in the school office because since I taught Megan 19 years ago, I didn't remember what grade I gave her. I figured I gave her an A, but I checked, and certainly she got an A in my class. So she was just, you're right, she worked hard, and she just shone at pretty much everything she attempted.
And that's a good message, isn't it? What do they dream of, the young American women you are teaching there almost 2 decades into the 21st century?
Well, we encourage them to dream big dreams. We encourage them to find their voices. We have a line in our school philosophy which all of the students know, and it's that we hope when a student graduates from Immaculate Heart, she'll be a young woman of great heart and right conscience. And so we tell them, be successful, go out there and do your thing, but remember to give back. And I have shown Megan's UN speech in my senior women's studies classes long before she was dating Prince Harry, because it's an example of someone very successful in her career, and yet she's still using her voice for those who have no voice, speaking about women's issues and going out and campaigning in Africa for people who need fresh water with World Vision Foundation. And so we were very happy to see that Megan wasn't just becoming a star, but she was using her voice to help bring change to the world.
Kristen Knudsen, Chair of Theology at Meghan Markle's old school, Immaculate Heart High School in LA. Ending Checkpoint for tonight and for the week on behalf of our really great and hard-working team. Should we have a shot, Kelvin? Look, there's three of them. That's Pip, the boss, shaking her head. Very, very, very reluctant to appear on camera. Thank you for your company this week and have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back Monday at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Teachers say the budget has done nothing to fix problems driving the teacher shortage, despite what the government says is the biggest spending increase in 10 years. There's widespread disappointment among Maori that the budget cut to Puni Kokiri funding and did not fulfil its promise of more money for whānau ora. The Drug Foundation is backing Shane Jones' warning about the Pacific being a gateway for drug trafficking into New Zealand. The police have paid tribute to the victims of the quarry attacker and repeat rapist Colin Jack Mitchell, who's been sentenced to preventative detention. $1 million report for the Auckland Council has no conclusion on whether the city should build a downtown stadium. And a cucumber shortage in central Auckland is being blamed on the royal wedding as people get ready to celebrate on this side of the world. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Country Life this week,